Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War, tracing the 155th anniversary of the Battle of Spotsylvania. Yesterday we followed the Union Army out of town. Today we're going to follow the Confederate Army out of town. It is May 22nd. Before we completely vacate Spotsylvania, though, we probably ought to kind of take a look at this last phase of the campaign. The armies were both here for 2 weeks. Lee's going to suffer somewhere between 10 and 12,000 casualties as he's hunkered down in his defensive works here at Spotsylvania. Many of those captives taken during Upton's breakthrough on the 10th, during Hancock's breakthrough on the 12th, and of course there's just continual fighting all along the line as Grant is probing and assaulting and innovating. Federals are going to have about 18,000 casualties over the course of the 2 weeks here, so they're going to, of course, being on the offensive, throwing themselves against the defensive works of Lee, they're going to end up being much more worse for the wear. But as Grant shifts out of Spotsylvania, he's really depleted his army by more than 36,000 men since the start of the campaign at the beginning of the Wilderness. So if you think about that, it starts around 120,000. He's down about 36,000 casualties. Sheridan has gone off with 10 or 12,000 troopers. Grant's line is extending, so he's got to devote men to protect that supply line. So by the time he leaves here, he's going to be down to about 68,000 men. Meanwhile, Lee started around 66,000 men. All of his casualties are going to bring him down, but then he's going to start getting some reinforcements. Pickett's division is going to come up from Drury's Bluff. Hoke's Brigade's going to come in. Breckinridge, after his victory at Newmarket, is going to come east, and Bolster's line and the Maryland line is going to come, about 2,100 guys there. So Grant's going to start to, Lee's going to start to see some reinforcements that bring him up to about 54,000 men. So think about that. 54 versus 68. Numerically, it's as close as the two armies are ever going to be at any point during this campaign. So Lee has a real opportunity as he leaves Spotsylvania. If he can find the right way to bring the fight to Grant under the right circumstances, things are pretty evenly matched. But Grant is going to have more reinforcements coming in. He's already started to draw some of those heavy artillery units from the Washington defenses. We talked about them on the 19th at the Battle of Harris Farm. So it's a really small window of opportunity for Lee. Now, we talked about yesterday Winfield Scott Hancock heading down toward Bowling Green, Milford Station, perhaps onto Hanover Junction, dangling out there as bait. Lee doesn't take it. Instead, he's going to shift troops and try to get the inside track to the North Anna River because he understands that's his next best defensive position. Through the magic of technology, we're going to kind of follow some spots along the way during today's segment. We're going to head off the first place at Mud Tavern. Mud Tavern. Let me see if I can articulate that a little more clearly before we dissolve. Once Lee heard that Grant was trying to pull out, he sent Richard Ewell to try to block the road so that Lee could have the inside track to Richmond. He comes here to Mud Tavern. The original tavern's still here. It's a Mexican restaurant, but really it's that intersection that's so important. Federals could have come straight down from Massaponax Church and down this road, modern-day Route 1, the Telegraph Road. It's the I-95 to Richmond. So by blocking this intersection, Ewell would deny Federals that straight shot toward Richmond. More importantly, toward the North Anna River, which is where Lee wants to set up his defenses. So Ewell will capture this intersection in one of his most effective days of the whole campaign. He'll send some artillery and engineers and infantry up in that direction to block the road even further. They'll eventually stymie Ambrose Burnside, preventing the Federals from actually pushing down this road in an effective manner. And that'll allow the Confederate Army to use this road to get the inside track toward the North Anna River. Meanwhile, while this is all going on, Winfield Scott Hancock's 2nd Corps is moving off to my left, down toward Bowling Green, past what's today the Stonewall Jackson Shrine, and in that direction. Now, Ewell's in a pretty precarious position when he's here because he's got Hancock off in that direction. He'll eventually have the 5th Corps off in that direction. Meanwhile, up in that direction, he'll have the 9th and 6th Corps. So Ewell could be the victim of an old pincer movement. But Grant, not thinking offensively, instead trying to hedge his bets, is not going to push in on Ewell, and that's going to allow the Confederates to slip on by and head south. After a brief overnight stay of just a few hours, Lee was up shortly after dawn and on the road back down toward the North Anna River. He had about 7 more miles to finish. He comes down the old road trace, crosses the river off to now by south in that direction. You can kind of see the remains of that road trace, and then gets across the river here. This is the site of the old Chesterfield Bridge. His first units across, Jubal Early's division from the 2nd Corps. Early had been in temporary command of the 3rd Corps up at Spotsylvania. He's now back to the division level with Richard Ewell's return. And Lee says to him, General Early, you must prepare fortifications and get ready to receive the enemy should he come. And Early is like, oh, General Lee, my men are too tired. They've been marching. They're not ready for this. Can you have someone else do it? And Lee, who by this point is completely exhausted, he's riding in a carriage because he's got dysentery, and he snaps at Early and he says, General, do not tell me what you cannot do. When I give you an order, I expect it to be carried off. And he sort of just leaves it at that and kind of doesn't really storm away, but angrily leaves. And Early looks to one of his staff officers and he says, General Lee is not a well man. That's going to be pretty foreboding for events as they unfold here along the North Anna. Once Lee gets across the river and his troops begin to kind of spread out across the landscape, he tells them to basically take a break. He is not expecting Ulysses S. Grant to come barreling in on his back. Based on all the reports he's getting, he thinks that Grant is actually going downriver to where the North Anna and the South Anna join together to become the Pamunkey. And Lee figures he's going to have to slide down in that direction in order to counter Grant's move toward Richmond. So he wants to give his army the chance to take a break, catch their breath, because they're going to have to move and fight pretty soon. It's been almost continual fighting and continual movement up to this point. So here's a chance for a much-needed timeout. He thinks that the North Anna provides a great defensive position, but he doesn't dig in, he doesn't take advantage of it, as I said, because he's expecting to move. But as we're down here by the river, I'll have you take a look. Look how steep these banks are. The river is shallow enough today we could actually walk right across. Don't forget there'd been a lot of rain in early May of 1864, so the river's going to be a lot higher. And one of the things that's kind of incredible about this is because the banks are so close together and so deep, when it does rain, this fills up quickly and the water can actually get quite high. I've actually seen it as high as over the bridge. You can see kind of off in that direction, Route 1 as it comes down through here. Lee saw this as such an ideal defensive position because the banks are so steep, which then creates all sorts of problems for an army trying to cross here. In most places, the south bank dominates the north bank. In some places, the north bank dominates the south, but for the most part, it's a great defensive position from the southern perspective. In fact, during the Battle of Fredericksburg, Lee didn't want to fight up there along the Rappahannock. He wanted to fight down here because he saw this as a much more defensible location. Politically, Jefferson Davis didn't want to give up that much free real estate, so he forced Lee to take a stand up there in Fredericksburg. But Lee had long recognized the strength of this geographic position. So Lee wins the race to the North Anna River and then does not capitalize on his success. He doesn't think he's going to have to fight here at all. But remember, when Grant started this campaign, he told Meade that it's not really Richmond that's the objective, it's the Army of Northern Virginia. Where Lee goes, there you shall go too. And so Grant is going to focus his attention right here at the North Anna River because this is where Lee is, and he's going to bring the fight to the Old Gray Fox. I'm Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War.